Oh, hey, deserving listeners. It's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the last couple of weeks. By the way, we have this merch here. This is the Apology Components tumbler. What's it called? Tumbler? Seems like a thermos mug. I use these all the time. Okay, Love is Blind emails upper tier anonymous patron. She wrote in about Colleen and says, "You've said something along the lines that Colleen might have had relational issues that have made her believe that she's not good enough and that she is perfectionistic in a self-destructive way." Just chiming in here, I've done whole deep dives on perfectionism if you want to listen to them if you're a patron. And also the key takeaway that I took away from my research on the concept of perfectionism in psychology and the research is that self-esteem is the moderating factor. So when you have perfectionism, as myself, I have a pretty good dose of perfectionism. When you have perfectionism plus self-esteem, then things tend to work out okay, generally speaking. Meaning that when you are striving, if you're perfectionistic, you are frequently obsessed, mildly at the very least, with achieving goals and achieving certain markers of success in your life or something. And for me, that manifests on the podcast a lot, actually. The whole podcast, you could argue, half of the reason why it exists and the YouTube channel is because I am moderately perfectionistic. And also the fact that the podcast, at the very least, isn't bad quality. I don't know if the podcast in the YouTube channel is of good quality, but I know it's not bad quality because I do everything, right? I do all the content, I do all the editing, the camera, the lighting, everything. I'm very perfectionistic in that way, and I really dislike it when something's a little off. And I edit the color tones in the video and the audio. Don't even get me started on that. Like I'm frequently upset at an audio quality situation, and then I'll talk to Stacy and she'll say, my wife, and she'll say I don't think anyone notices, but I'll be like, but I notice. And also perfectionism regarding the content. I'm always trying to strive to make sure that it's good content, that it's useful to y'all, that it's scientifically accurate, this kind of thing, presented in a non-boring way. I don't know if I always achieve with that, but anyway, yeah, and I've always been this way since I was a kid. I was pretty perfectionistic about sports and about academics. Also in my house, I'm pretty perfectionistic. I like everything to be in its place. I like things to be clean. There's also obsessive compulsive personality disorder sprinkled in there. They're related concepts. Anyway, but the key is that I was also raised well enough such that I have pretty good self-esteem. And so when I am striving for perfectionism, I'm striving to be perfect, I'm striving to accomplish things, and say things don't work out perfectly, because they never do really, then I have self-esteem to fall back on. I can say, I didn't achieve that I was striving for. I was really trying to get there, but it didn't work. What do I do? Well, what are you going to do? I'm still a good person, even though I'm not perfect. I'm striving to be perfect, but I'm never perfect. I'm okay as a person. Whereas if you're perfectionistic, mild to severe obsessive compulsive personality disorder, but low self-esteem, then when you don't achieve perfectionistic goals, you don't have anything to fall back on, and you'll just be like, and so you're always on that treadmill of trying to be perfect and never really landing on a place where you feel like you're okay with yourself. So there's a lot more complicated notions to the concept of perfectionism. You can listen to the deep dive. There's different types of perfectionism. But anyway, so that's what I was wondering about with Colleen. And so up to your anonymous patron, she says, you said something along the lines that Colleen might have had relational issues, because usually that's where we develop perfectionism. Perfectionism often is a result of either mild neglect growing up or some degree of emotional neglect, because as a child, and the message that if you were perfect or less messy or something, less problematic, or achieved more. Some kids get rewarded primarily for what they achieve as opposed to being rewarded for just being who they are. So there can be that issue that can lead to perfectionism. So it's relational in nature and how it develops in terms of my model. And the research seems to point in that direction. So you've said something along the lines that Colleen might have had relational issues that have made her believe that she's not good enough and that she is perfectionistic in a self-destructive way. Well, doing ballet can have that effect. Speaking from my experience as an ex-ballerina, the ballet world makes you believe that you are never good enough. You will never be perfect, but you must strive for perfection. And let's not even talk about body image issues. You can also never be skinny enough for ballet. At the age of 18, I believed that I was unlovable and would always be worthless. I've been working on my self-esteem and fighting perfectionism my whole adult life. Probably not every ballet dancer has the same experience, and of course I can't say the same is true for Colleen, but it seems to me that most ballet dancers I knew were also perfectionists and suffered from low self-esteem. End of email. Yeah, thanks, Anonymous, upper tier patron. So the thing that comes to mind is that I'm guessing that there are certain industries, certain sports, certain jobs, certain communities that will not only attract problematic, perfectionistic individuals because of their relational traumas, but also will normalize it and will even make it worse. So you could imagine in ballet, and there are other places too. I think gymnastics is another area like this. Sports, wrestling. I'll speak for myself. When I was a kid, I wrestled and was I'm perfectionistic, so I strived very hard to be a very good wrestler, and to some extent, it was my best sport. I played a lot of sports growing up, and wrestling arguably was the sport I was kind of made to do. With wrestling in that world, it's really common to be perfectionistic in a problematic way. For example, one of the things that you would have to do in order to succeed in wrestling was you wanted to be as light as possible, weighing in. Because if you just eat normally and exercise normally, then you will weigh a certain amount, and in all likelihood you'll be, because the higher weight classes, the harder the wrestlers became, because they were bigger and stronger. And so it benefited you to lose as much weight as possible so that you could get into a lower weight class so you could wrestle against easier opponents. And so and sometimes it would just completely make or break the season for you. You know, if you didn't lose weight, you could lose all your matches. But if you lost 10 pounds, you could win all your matches. You know, it was a pretty big deal. And everyone did it. Everyone on my wrestling team anyway were problematically dieting to the point where before the match we would all starve ourselves, wouldn't eat anything, wouldn't even drink water because water will cause weight gain. So we wouldn't eat, and then sometimes if I was really pressed because I was not weighing in, I wasn't low enough weight, I would wrap myself in, and the other people did this too, in cellophane, put sweat, clothes on, sweat jacket, sweat pants, and then exercise to try to get rid of all the water. So not only are you starving, but you're also extremely dehydrated. And then you'd weigh in, you would manage to get underweight, and then you would eat all these calories, and then you would wrestle. And there was a fair amount of eating disorder behavior, purging, for example, restricting in the wrestling world. And this is when I was in middle school. We were like 12, 13, 14 years old. It's not healthy. You know, from the outside world, you would look at the wrestling world, you'd be like, what? You have 13, and I don't know what kids are doing today. I suspect it might even be worse because at least things tend to get worse over time because there's very little pushback on it. That anyone outside that world would think of that as barbaric and unfair to a 14-year-old, you know? So it's a similar thing in the ballet world, I'm guessing, in the gymnastic world, I know it's there. There are other sports along these lines too. So you can imagine that certain people would be attracted to that world because they're perfectionistic. And also they would succeed more because they're more problematically perfectionistic and put themselves in the back burner, are willing to make more sacrifices. And then you also have the culture of that world, because the coaches often come from that world, right? And were probably also problematically perfectionistic and sacrificing of themselves. And so it just becomes completely normalized. So I wouldn't doubt that in the ballet world, It's just like completely normal that you would have an eating disorder problem, that you would hate yourself and shame yourself. If the coaches are shaming themselves, they might actually shame you too for not looking a certain way and, not looking completely emaciated, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, and we need to look at that because in our culture, we tend to elevate people like this. We tend to elevate people who achieve things, and we just think, well, if you're going to achieve, you have to make sacrifices. And how commendable that is. We'll often even commend people for doing what it takes to get the gold medal or to get the higher position. And that's a problem. That is a humongous problem, obviously. Listener EC from Illinois, she says, in Love is Blind Season 3, you conceptualize Nancy as possibly being invisibilized by her family. So just chiming in here, I don't know if I made up that word. I don't recall reading that term invisibilized in any literature, but it doesn't mean I haven't because I've read a lot of literature. But yeah, from my memory, I developed it with a particular client many years ago and then started using it more with other clients and then started talking about it on the podcast. I've actually developed a lot of concepts, at the very least my understanding of a lot of concepts while I was working with a client, just really getting into their experience and their defenses and their relational traumas and how things, and really listening to them and trying to figure out what makes them tick. And then over time, developing these ideas that eventually lead to me spouting about them on the podcast. So yeah, I was conceptualizing Nancy as possibly being invisibilized by her family. I don't have enough data to say that, of course, but there seem to be some yellow flags of that. That word deeply resonated with me. The word invisibilized and your description gave me the aha moment. Not only was I made to feel invisible growing up, but I have invisibilized myself for most of my life. Yeah, just chiming in here. That's the double-edged sword or the double problem to the problem is that when you are treated in a certain way, you internalize that often and will do it to yourself. It's like the gift that keeps on giving in a horrible way. Thank you for adding that critical word to my vocabulary. I am now recognizing that behavior in myself. And working to share more of myself with my family and friends. Do you have other episodes that cover the topic of being invisibilized as a child? End of email. I suspect I've talked about it before, maybe in episodes with Bob. I'm not sure, but I don't think I've done a full episode on being invisibilized, but maybe I should. All right, Zenib interview number 1. Daisy says, why would she meet with his ex-wife? Why would Zenib meet with Cole's ex-wife? It's such an odd thing to do if you are done with someone, unless you want to gather more data against him. Juan Carlos also had a comment similar to this and says, I have to admit, I'm a little surprised by how chill Dr. Kirk seems to be with her reaching out to the ex. The very concept of involving a third person in your relationship is just very red flag in general. End of comments. Yeah, so it just depends, because if Zenib reached out to Cole's ex as a way of trying to gather information about him and then to publicly disclose what they came up with as a way of trying to humiliate Cole online, then I would say that that is unethical, maybe even immoral. This whole business of outing people online in these situations, I do find to be immoral, because when you do that, when Zenib, and they both have said things in interviews at the very least against each other, that when you do that, you set up a situation where if you're the recipient of that kind of criticism online, in a more mundane example, you date someone for 6 months and your friends follow them on Instagram or become friends with them on Facebook or something, and you break up, and then your former partner just starts talking crap about you. Now, if you deserve it, I guess maybe, but I would say 100% of the time when there's a breakup, we do not have a rational point of view of our former partner. And so to just process that online is unethical, possibly immoral, because you're kind of lying, essentially. You're spreading lies. You're spreading a spin of a story that is particular to you because you just broke up with them, but is not fair because, I think another problem is that when, like, for example, if someone talked shit about me online, the people close to me that I rely on for secure attachment, they know me well enough to know that those comments are either not true or are exaggerations or something. So I think it's a product of our current society that someone could talk shit about you online and that could completely ruin your social life because a lot of your relationships are kind of surface and dependent on your online persona, which is not healthy, Having said that, even if you did have secure relationships, in the real world, and someone talked crap about you online, it puts you in a position where you have to defend yourself. And, once those accusations are out there, particularly in certain cultural circles, if a woman comes forward like Zeneb and starts and accuses Cole of being body shaming and abusive, most people by default, even if Cole provided a viable defense online, most people would just assume that Zeneb was telling the truth. And that's just not okay. That's just not fair. So if that's what Zeneb was doing and that's what her intent was, then that's not okay. But if Zeneb's intent, and seemingly given the fact that Zeneb hasn't said much, in an interview, I don't know if I've posted it yet, she does briefly, because someone asks her, she does briefly say that the ex confirmed a lot of Zeneb's complaints about Cole, but it was really brief, and she didn't say much beyond that, which I don't think is okay, but on the scale of things, because Zeneb could have said a lot of things, right? She could have been like, well, the ex-wife hates him in the same way that I hate him. She could have been more specific, because I'm guessing from Cole's account, Cole's ex-wife is very upset still at Cole, because I think the divorce wasn't that long before the season of season 3 began. Anyway, so if Zeneb's intent was to meet up with the ex to just share notes, then I think that's totally fine. If Zeneb went to the ex and said, like, and we can't really imagine this happening, but maybe it did, that Zeneb would reach out and say, hey, let's meet up. I just want to talk to you because I just want to share notes. And so they meet up, and Zeneb is like, look, I'm not here to vilify Cole. I just want to tell you my experience with him because I'm not sure if it was him or me or both of us or something. And I'm just looking for some kind of validation or some even indication that maybe I was distorted or something like that. So here's my experience with Cole. He did this, he did that, he did this, and I think he has this problem. I'm not quite sure. Did you ever see this? Did you experience this? And let's say that the former partner of Cole is just like, well, when I was with him, it certainly did feel that way. But, upon going to therapy and thinking about it more, I think that Cole is more innocent than I assumed, and I had this reaction. I've grown since then, and I've thought about it some more. And then Zeneb and the former partner talk and say like, oh, okay, well, I'm sorry you went through that, and I'm sorry. And then maybe Zeneb and the former partner go to Cole and say, hey, we talked about you and concluded that although you have some issues, you're not as bad as maybe we thought you were. Okay. Now, depending, I don't know the real situation, but that would be okay with me. And there's a lot of other options. There's a lot of other intents that one could have. There's a lot of other outcomes that could come from that. It's not uncommon for former partners to know each other, or for your current partner to be friends with your former partners. I'm not saying you have to be that way, but that's not inherently a problem, right? In fact, I would say it's a good sign. Often on this show, the Julias of the world will say that it's a big problem if their current partner is friends with their exes. And what I'm always thinking is that's a huge green flag. It's not necessary, of course. It's not the only potential green flag one could have, of course. But if you meet someone and they're still friends with their ex, that says something. It's hard to know what exactly is happening, but it's possible that the person you're dating is differentiated enough, mature enough, self-aware enough, such that when they did break up, that they managed to still stay in contact, maybe even friends, maybe support we need all the friends and support we can get in life. And it's not usually sometimes it's rational to hate your former partner, for sure. But a lot of the times it's not entirely rational to hate. You don't have to have contact with a person, but to hate that person often is a result of displacement or transference or distortions or something. Not always, of course. But so to have your current partner and your former partner friends, and maybe sometimes they talk about you, and they share notes, and maybe even they both complain about you. So when I hear that Zeneb reached out to the former partner of Cole, I don't know what that was. So that's why, Juan Carlos, I was chill, because I was reserving judgment until we do. I know that the internet was jumping down her throat for it, like it was disgusting. And you could argue that it was gross in that she posted it on TikTok, from what I understand, saying that she was going to meet up with her. That's not great, right? It'd be different if she just met up with Cole's ex, and they just had this private conversation, and then later on she's asked about it. But I guess the only way for it to be okay in my book is if she did meet up with her, if she was going to do that, if she just didn't talk about it online, is the thing. Now, I don't think it went well for Zeneb. I think her posting that on TikTok, at least from my understanding, the consensus was it made her look bad and not Cole. All right, Zeneb interview number 2. CMJ on YouTube commented and said, I believe that a lot of Zeneb's interactions with Cole, she was trying to serve softballs to open up room for compliments, like an opportunity for Cole to say, no, you're perfect, or you're beautiful at any rate. I suspect this because I've also tried these tactics with my partner. And much like Cole, my partner swings and misses every time, to the point where I realize that if I need words of affirmation from him, I just need to be direct rather than playing some silly game. Cole's response of "you're fattening yourself up" came across to me as very much a "eat whatever you want, but don't come at me about it." End of comment. Yeah, so I don't know about that last bit. I'm sort of forgetting that bit. But yeah, you'll hear me talk about this sometimes, that we can't expect our partners to read our minds. Also, it's a nice idea that we would never have to ask for these things, that our partner would just intuit or just shower us with love and attention enough for us such that we don't have to ask for it. But, typically in longer term relationships, I guess both are true, right? For all y'all out there in relationships. One, think about what your partner probably wants from you. And rather than waiting for them to ask you to give it to them, like a compliment or physical affection or something, maybe try to do those things. Remember to do those things. So that'd be good, right? But then on the other hand, if that doesn't happen, because things tend to cool down in long-term relationships over time, the passion goes down, the motivation. Because that's the other thing, is like in the beginning of a relationship, commonly, you don't have to ask for your partner to compliment you or to kiss you or to, all that kind of stuff, because we evolved clearly to just be obsessed with each other for, something like 1 to 3 years-ish period of time. Enough time to get pregnant. And, actually the research suggests that it's like somewhere around 4 to 5, 6 years where the heavier passion, motivation to be together lasts, which you could argue that in our past, when we were evolving, we were selected for that psychological trait where you become obsessed with a partner long enough such that one is pregnant, and long enough for both partners to be together while they're taking care of a young infant. And then once the infant is 4 years old and able to walk around and somewhat fend for themselves, then the relationship isn't as necessary. You know, maybe they did stay together in the past, but it's not as critical to the child's survival, which is, you know, what a lot of our psychology has to do with. We evolved a lot of mechanisms to promote survival and procreation. So, you know, makes sense. But anyway, so when you are in longer term relationships, maybe past that point, the 4-year mark, then you can't rely on your partner to naturally want to do that to you. So you have to ask for it, you know, and if, as long as you're being non-accusatory and non-hostile and your partner listens to you and cares about you, which we could assume that they do, then, you know, then they'll give it to you. You know, it's not great to be like, hey, can you compliment me today? Because it could come across like it's not real, but, you know, you got to be pragmatic in long-term relationships. And really, even for, this goes for friends, this goes for bosses. Often we want affirmation from our boss, and so asking that. I ask it from you. I've done that a few times. I depend on you in the same way that I depend on my wife and my friends and others in my life to validate me. And this whole American notion that you should never have to depend on other people, it's just ridiculous. It's inhuman and illogical and unscientific to propagate the notion that we are independent creatures. It's such an American notion. You know, the lone rider rides off into the sunset and he doesn't need anyone because he's cool. It's nonsense. Utter bullshit nonsense that is very destructive to our society and also sexist, because we tend to think of men as being more independent, and that's better. It's more preferred it's just terrible. So we need to really fully acknowledge and push out the cultural indoctrination that somehow we should be able to do things on our own. It's just not. We evolved clearly from a species that it was, well, so that's a weird statement. We evolved clearly as a species to be very, very social. And we have a lot of mechanisms in our psychology and our hormones and our neurotransmitters and our physical health that are trying to orient us to be social. The way to think about it is that for us in the past, when we were evolving in our more long-term environment in the African Pleistocene savanna, these individuals were highly dependent on their tribe, on their people, to as a herd. You know, because when you're a part of a herd, you're more likely to notice predators. And, you know, believe me, it's often not portrayed this way, but we were predated upon. Cats, tigers, pumas, jaguars, they ate us. And it's not hard to imagine that a tiger would not have a hard time, a lion of catching us and eating us. I feel like a regular house cat could kill me if they wanted to. So we are very defenseless unless we are part of a group. When we're part of a group, when there's 10 of us, 20 of us, then and we've got rocks as tools and sticks and stuff, then we can do all sorts of things. We can become the top predator on the planet. So we need to be oriented towards other humans, and nature doesn't depend on people to conclude things. Nature will select for humans that developed that the mechanism to be oriented towards other humans. So how do you do that? What sort of way can nature and biology orient you towards other humans? Well, the way that you do it is I can go on a long jag about this, but in a nutshell, there are pain, when you are stabbed in the leg, there's a pain notification through your nervous system and avoidance. So pain, ow, and you move away, right? Well, our species and other social creatures will adopt that mechanism of pain and also attraction to make sure that we're social. So when we are separated from our people and we don't have a lot of contact with them, then pain and depression starts to kick in as a way to motivate us toward the other. Think about it like if we just stick to the physical realm, you are I don't know, you're heading into a really cold zone and your body starts to feel that pain from the cold. And so you're like, oh, I don't like this. So you go away from the cold zone, more towards the warm zone, right? So there's that pain, pleasure, motivation system. Well, the same is true as when we started to move away from our tribe, pain would set in and discomfort and fear. And then that alerts, okay, go back. And so you do this enough times, then you're like, oh, clearly it feels better over here. And then that mechanism gets evolved into our species, okay? In our current environment, we're very alone and thus often in a lot of pain and a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of discomfort, a lot of demoralization. So we need other people, is the point. And so when you could be in a seemingly secure relationship, marriage, but without frequent affirmations, you might actually feel very distant, right? You might feel as though you're drifting away from the tribe. But in order to feel closer to the tribe, you feel you need that indication that they care and they like you and all those kinds of things. And so along those lines, for y'all, when you say nice things to me or tell me that I'm on the right track or even just tell me that I exist on the planet, you define me. You give me that. When there's not much of that, I feel that pain and I feel that demoralization of just like, am I floating out here in space? Is a puma about to eat me? That kind of thing. So, and I appreciate it. And by the way, when you do comment and you say nice things, I don't always indicate that I read it, but I often do see it for various different reasons. The best way to, if you really want to say something to me, is email me, go to the website, contact button, and email me from there. Then I will, 99% of the time, I will see it. So anyway, so think about that for yourself of how, and often, and again, it becomes so normalized in our society to be alone and to be in that pain that it can just feel like, well, that's just normal life. So really think about, like, do you have frequent feelings of togetherness and attachment security? Do you have frequent, and not everyone's the same, there's different dimensions to this, right? But generally speaking, we need a fair amount of physical affection. We need a fair amount of hugging and cuddling and, sexual activity, I suppose. Well, of course, but, more frequently, throughout the day, it's hugging and being next to each other, holding hands, this kind of thing. Eye contact. We need that because when we don't get that, our evolved mechanisms kick in to make us miserable, to motivate us toward people again. So there we go. Sarah says, Dr. Honda, while watching this series, I'm reminded of some previous videos where you talked about the importance of telling your partner what you need because they aren't inside your head. Since then, when I've had some hard moments, I made a conscious effort to tell my partner what I needed in that moment. Even though it felt a little weird to say things like, I need you to say some encouraging things to me right now, and I need you to hug me. But it's helped me to receive from what I need. Also, it has helped me realize that even though my partner doesn't always do these things automatically, that doesn't mean that he doesn't care very deeply for me. I've been learning so many things about myself and other people's speculative experiences since I started watching your show a couple years back. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Oh, well, you're welcome, Sarah. And that validates me, by the way. So I feel connected in this moment. Thanks. And yeah, I always say this, that if being cheesy, if being corny is being healthy, then be corny. Yeah. And it's corny to say, I need you to say some encouraging things to me right now. And I'll say particularly for you men, by the way, because you men, like me, have been socialized to deny these things. So you might not even know what you need to, so there's different dimensions to this. There's the asking for what you need, which is a leap of vulnerability, but often important and needed. There's another element, though, of knowing what you need. And so you need both. You need to know what you need, and it needs to be spontaneous. You can't just have a general understanding of like, I need hugs, or I mean, it's fine in the interim, but what you really need is a spontaneous notion of in the moment, what do I need right now? And it just emerges for you, right? And you don't even have to check in with yourself. You just know, like, I need a hug. Like for me, this morning I woke up and my wife was on the couch watching TV, having, with the dogs, which isn't normal for her, but I don't know. Anyway, point is, she's on the couch, and I just got on top of her. It wasn't sexual, but not that would be a problem. But I'm just, so I got on top of her, and we cuddled for a bit and had a physical moment. I don't normally do that in the morning. I mean, sometimes I do, but when I think about it, I must have been in contact with what I needed. And I just did it because the need emerged in me. There were other things that were pulling me in different directions. I wanted to deal with the ice. We have all this ice. Climate change, I'm pretty sure, is here to stay, and Seattle is having a lot of, normally in Seattle we're very mild weather-wise. We don't get snow, we don't get super hot days. All that's over. Super hot days in the summer, snow in the winter, seemingly, and so I was wanting to get outside to kind of deal with all the ice because I don't want someone to fall down. But I did something else. So think about that for yourself. It's just, anyway. The other thing that you say here, Sarah, that's really great is, just because I have to ask my husband, my partner, to give me these things, that doesn't mean he doesn't care about me deeply. And that's really important to know. Just because you have to ask your partner to say, can you tell me that you love me, or can you hug me, or just because you have to ask for that. In our culture, we tend to equate that with, well, if you have to ask, then your partner doesn't want to do it, or your partner doesn't really love you. That is not true. I would venture a lot of the time, your partner actually wants to do those things for you, but because things, I don't know, I could go into the detail, but to save time, I won't, is that a lot of the time, it's a vulnerable thing to do those things, right? It's a vulnerable thing to compliment. It's a vulnerable thing to hug. And so they might actually be kind of scared. They want to do those things, but they're afraid of you rejecting them. And so when you ask them to do it, they're like, oh, permission, yay, So it's a win-win. And just because someone doesn't do something doesn't mean they don't actually really want to do it. So you initiating it can be a godsend to that person. Zenib interview number 3, Cynthia says, the mom did try to console Cole. So, we heard that Cole, after the wedding, was hugged by Zenib's mom. And Cynthia says, the mom did try to console Cole, and he told her that he would never do those things to anyone, meaning that Cole said something, apparently. And I don't remember this in the by the way, I'm going back. It'll be a while before these episodes are posted, but I started recording them the other day. That I'm going back to the beginning. I'm going to watch season 3 all over again and react to it and post it. I'm going to try to be a lot quicker because, but I want to go to the key scenes, and I actually want to watch that scene again to see, because there's a lot of things that I don't remember happening, or I'll see them differently having known what we know now. And so I don't know, I told Stacy that I was doing it, and she's like, do you think anyone will want to watch that? And I was just like, I don't care, because I want to watch it again. I find that season 3 is so interesting. There's so many things to get into, and to go back and rewatch it, knowing what we know now, I just find it's just personally curious for me. It's a personal curiosity for myself to watch those scenes through my current perspective, my current knowledge base. Anyway, but Cynthia said, the mom did try to console Cole, and he told her that he would never do those things, meaning that Cole's like, I didn't do those things to Zenib, and the mom agreed and said, I know. Okay, that's interesting. I guess I'll have to rewatch that. But if that's true, we could imagine a world in which Zenib's mom knows Zenib's issues, might have even been a target of them. I have no data for that, of course. But if that's true, then maybe Zenib's mom might be sympathetic to Cole because of that. Who knows? It also could be that Zenib's mom was just trying to be nice. But it would be really interesting to hear from Zenib's mom. They should interview more people. Maybe some of y'all are like, hey, Kirk, why don't you interview some of these people? And I don't know. Like, I I feel like a lot of the other YouTubers will do a good enough job, or a really great job, interviewing these folks so that I don't have to do it. But I do have questions. But I don't know. I'm a little shy about doing that because with season 1, I actually did reach out to Love is Blind, and at first, a lot of the cast were like, yeah, I want to come on your YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, interesting, because there's so many questions that I have. But then they would get back to me and tell me that the show or their agent was saying that they can't do that because of contract reasons, because they can't disclose certain things. But this current cast seems very willing to do interviews after and reveal things, particularly Cole, right? So I don't know. I would personally be curious about a lot of there's a lot of questions that have been asked in the interviews that I've been watching, but there's some other questions that aren't being asked in as depth of a way that I would want to. So maybe I would, but sometimes I also just think I just want my channel to be kind of the way that it is, and to change it by interviewing the cast members more explicitly and publicly, I feel like would change the tone a little bit. And I'm kind of mindful of that. Anyway, Hey Addles says, this explanation of having relationships that help your self-esteem is something I've never thought of. So just chiming in here, I think what they're talking about is that, as I was talking about earlier, that our self-esteem, we often frame it in America as dependent on our own self-love, but that's not what the science shows. You can have all the self-love in the world, and you'll still have terrible self-esteem if you've been treated horribly, because we define ourselves by the way we're being treated. Because we don't know, right? None of us know who we really are until people tell us who we are. And if you get enough of that, hopefully when people are young, then you have enough self-esteem such that you don't need other people to tell you who you are all the time. But if you find someone with low self-esteem, the cure is to have esteem for them, to support them and validate them and compliment them such that they're filled with notions that they can carry with them, and thus believe that they're good enough so that they can weather the storm when there are, bouts of onslaught to their self-esteem, and which is a very un-American thing to think, right? We're supposed to be able to do things completely on our own. And you'll hear therapists say shit like this sometimes, just like cognitive behavioral therapy is, although great, and I use it all the time, there are certain ways of using it that I think will fall in line with this destructive American cultural notion that you just need to change your thoughts. You just need to change your self-talk. And it's like, that fine, and that will help. But the cure for low self-esteem is to have relationships that teach you that you're worth it. So, Hey Adel says, it really explains why I have poor self-esteem. It's from really poor relationships I've had, including family, friends, and romantic partners. So they're saying that with their poor relationships that didn't go well, they have low self-esteem because of that. Maybe I'm the problem and I'm the one creating the issues. End of comment. I don't know what you mean by that last sentence there, Hey Adels, but I think what you're saying is, you're saying, I've had a lot of poor relationships and thus I have low self-esteem. And since I've had a lot of poor relationships, maybe that's on me because I'm the common denominator in all those bad relationships. Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is it's not your fault that you were treated badly. So there's that. But it's also possible that given your schemas and your relational traumas, you have engineered relationships to not be conducive to your self-esteem, to have issues, right? So you might be a part of the problem for sure. And, of course, going to therapy to figure that out is important. But don't overall, no one wakes up in the morning and says, I want to have bad relationships. We are desperately trying to have good relationships, but due to our relational traumas and our schemas, the way we were treated, defenses will kick in that will sabotage us unknowing to ourselves. So don't beat yourself up about it, because that will just play into the schema that you're to blame for everything and that you're not good enough. So I want to be clear about that. You can have both. You can say to yourself, it's not my fault, meaning that I'm not going to beat myself up about it. You can say that, and you can also say, I probably am playing a part in how my relationships have gone as an adult. So both can be true, okay? It's not one or the other. Sam says, what are your thoughts on people holding on to grudges for extended periods of time? At what point is it unhealthy as opposed to reasonable? End of comment. Yeah, Sam, that's a great question. It depends, of course. On one hand, in romantic relationship, like with my wife, to hold a grudge against her, which of course I've had temptations to do. I mean, not tremendous, but there's been moments, I guess, that will, if my intent is to have a good relationship with my wife, which it is, because not everyone has that intent. Some people are divorcing or something, but my intent is to have a good relationship, then I've got to get rid of that grudge. I've got to get rid of that contempt. I've got to resolve that somehow. I've got to reframe it in my mind or something, because that will grow and will affect our relationship, and that's on me, right? And it's also up to me to engineer our relationship or interactions with her such that it's easier to let go of grudges, right? Or to change the grudge into something more reasonable. Often the pathway is to conceptualize accurately such that it provokes empathy. So, if my wife seems distant and cold to me for a while, the conclusion, the distortion, is that she doesn't care about my feelings. But a more accurate conceptualization is she's probably very stressed out about something and is going internal and shutting herself off from a lot of things and becoming cold to me. But she's not doing it on purpose to me. She's actually suffering quietly, not noticeably, which makes me feel distant. And although I'm being affected by it, and that sucks, it's not that she doesn't care about my feelings, it's that she is suffering, okay? So when I see it accurately, it provokes empathy, or at the very least, it saves me from feeling like I'm being purposely mistreated, And that's often the case in relationships. It's not always, of course, but it's often the case. So to have grudges is not healthy for me in my relationship. But I do have grudges against people in my past. I mean, I don't know if I would frame it as a grudge, but I have contempt. I have anger. I have feelings about relationships. It's just a handful of people, maybe less, that I can think of off the top of my head, that I do not have positive feelings about and will never, and have no interest in, getting rid of my quote unquote grudge against them. It depends. I could see a pathway in which I would determine that maybe I should try to move on or something like that. And it's not like I think about it all the time, but I find that another way to put grudge, the term, is to understand someone accurately. There's certain relationships in my past where they were long-term, and I was really trying hard to make it work and to please the other person so that they would treat me better. And over time, and this is an oversimplification, but it's generally true, that over time I figured out that given their issues, and I have compassion for them, and I know that they were, socialized this way when they were growing up, due to their issues, they're always going to harm me to some degree. And there might be periods of time where they're not harming me, but eventually they will harm me. And so another way to put grudge, another way to frame it, is an accurate conceptualization of them and how we come together as a relationship. And to hold on to that, to not let go of it, and to respect it, and to respect myself enough to recognize that that's what's happening. You call that a grudge. Is there some contempt in there? Yeah, because if it's ongoing enough, to have contemptuous feelings is, I think, rational. Okay, so I think that that's another side to grudge. I don't know. What do you think? Now, you say this to, and listen to all my deep dives on apology. I think some people were pulling away from those deep dives that somehow you're always supposed to apologize, you're always supposed to forgive, and you're always supposed to apologize or something like that. But particularly, you're always supposed to forgive. And no, that's not how I operate. I don't know if I'm the pinnacle of health or anything, but I think it's absolutely rational and actually healthy. I would deem, just off the top of my head, I would deem it healthy that I hold on to a so-called grudge with certain people in my past because it reminds me to stay away from them, essentially, or to draw a boundary with them. So, yeah. Cole interview number 1, Silver Arrow says, Dr. Kirk saying Bone Town has me completely dead. Did I say Bone Town? Why would I say Bone Town? Did Cole say Bone Town? Not Chandler Bing says, your comments about posting about others on social media was so amazing. I once had someone post a lot of hurtful and personal information about me, and for 5 years I have struggled to socialize with anyone. It's so validating to hear your comments, and since they align with my therapist's remarks, it's another push to try and put myself out there again. Yeah, so from what I'm understanding, Chandler, you're saying that you had a relationship with someone and then they posted a lot of hurtful personal information about you, and that was traumatizing for you, which I could see. And for 5 years since, you have struggled to socialize with anyone because I'm guessing, 1, you worry that they might do the same to you, or 2, that they know the stuff that was posted about you and think negative things about you. So it's just easier to avoid the whole thing, which I get, yeah. And that really puts a fine point on what I was saying earlier, that it's immoral to do that to someone. Look, if you have a complaint that you want to say to someone, say it to them directly, okay? If it's a private DM or something, I don't even recommend that because that can be screenshot, and also it can be misinterpreted if it's over text. Have a conversation with them. Also, if you want to complain about someone, go ahead, verbally, to your friends, to your therapist. To post online, not okay. Not okay. Unless you absolutely know it's moral to do so. I could see a scenario where someone beat you regularly and was violent and abusive, horrible. You could make an argument that to post publicly about that individual, if it's determined that you're not being distorted, to out that person because justice-wise, that person might deserve it. And maybe the world needs to know that that person needs to be avoided or something, or that person needs to understand that they need to go to treatment or whatever. I still wouldn't necessarily recommend that, because you can certainly go to their people. Like if, say, your partner did that, you could go to their family and friends and just be like, look, I just want to tell you what's happening behind the scenes. You can believe me or not. I don't want to post this online. I just want you to know my experience and use this information for what you will. I would still recommend that over just publicly posting something like that. The internet is helpful for a lot of things. I don't think it's helpful in this way. Cole interview number 2, Racist says, notably during the cuties scene, Zay intentionally says that she won't tell Cole why she hadn't eaten anything else that day. Given how she also handled their first morning together, I don't believe she told Cole how she felt. I do believe Cole here. Right, so we were hearing from Cole, his claim was that all those complaints that Zeneb had about him, she had never said anything to him or had barely indicated some of the things to him. And I was saying, well, we don't know. Zeneb's saying one thing, Cole's saying another, and we weren't there. And so I was maybe throwing it out there. And so Risa was like, you know what? I kind of believe Cole here because, even in the scenes that we saw, Zeneb was refraining. She had a style of saying things that was not telling the full story, right? Jennifer Cave commented, by the way, Jennifer Cave, thanks for the gift that you sent. I opened up on the last comments video. You sent some minifigures that are behind me on the shelf, and also you sent some Psychology in Seattle magnets. You took some of our pictures from the podcast and made these magnets. I really like those. You like custom-made magnets, with the what do you call it? The see-through plastic stuff. Anyway, and they're on my door. It's great. Jennifer says, sometimes, myself included, some people will make a comment about ourselves, usually about our appearance, wanting our partner to disagree and say we look good, etc. I think Zeneb did that to Cole often, and I believe he did not understand what she was wanting from him. It got old watching her expect Cole to read her mind. Yeah, it looked that way to me too. Cole number three says, Cole interview number 3, digital says, when first dating my now husband, he asked me to rate him on a scale. I told him I was sorry, but I would not do that. I told him that I thought a scale is silly and doesn't make any sense. I reassured him that I was really attracted to him and that it's about the full picture, including his personality and soul. End of comment. Yeah, this whole rating thing has really caused, and reading comments and thinking about it has really caused me to refine this, because I knew there was something off about the whole rating thing and the way people talked about it typically. Because on one hand, people will rate people, and then the other hand, I would hear people get angry whenever anyone was rated. They'd be like, how dare you rate? And of course, there can be sexist objectification ways of rating people, for sure. But I think that it's helped me to refine this whole notion of and also just attraction or how we see our partners, right? There are different dimensions, and I've talked about this before, but just briefly, there are different dimensions to the rating, right? If you're rating your partner on, if you didn't know your partner and you were just in a lineup saying who is the most attractive person in the lineup, right? And you just have 100 different people, what number, just based on looks, would you give all those people? That's one type of rating. That's typically, as Americans, what we really privilege, right? That's the most important thing, and it's not, right? Because in relationships, it's way, way, way bigger than that in terms of attraction, in terms of wanting to be with someone, in terms of wanting to have sex with someone, in terms of being turned on by someone, right? In terms of wanting to look into someone's eyes. It's way more than that. It has to do with personality and security and all those things, So when we're rating someone, what are we really talking about? So you could say legit that your partner is a 10, but if you put them in a lineup and you didn't know your partner, you could say, well, I don't know, but it's hard for me to be objective, but I might actually put my partner as a 3 out of 10 if I didn't know them and I didn't know their personality and didn't know what a wonderful, sexy person they are, then yeah, I guess I'd say they'd probably be a 3. But that is not what dictates how I feel about it. And I never even think about them in that way. I think about them as the whole person that I know them and all the experiences we've had, and I am absolutely massively attracted to that person and consider that person to be extremely appealing, all that kind of stuff. So, and I feel like it's just getting worse, like Tinder and all these other things. It's all just rating, right? That's all people are doing when they're swiping. They're just looking, unless you read the bio, which some people will, to be like, oh, that's a funny way to describe it, and they'll swipe right because of that. But most of the time it's just like 10, 10, swipe right, 10, 10. Oh, that person's a 6, swipe left. It's like, that's not how we operate. It's not healthy. Ellie says, the 1 to 10 scale definitely doesn't work without more context. I'm one of those people who, when I'm in love, that person is my 10, but I can see that other people may be a 10. I am not attracted to them as a 10. Does that make any sense? Yeah, Ellie, makes sense. Podwife. So this must be actually from my wife. So my wife compiles these comments and, so for me to read them. And in this episode, I was saying how I see my wife as a 10, not only in the way of just looks, because she is objectively, because she's a model, but also because of who she is, her personality and all that kind of stuff. And so, in all the dimensions, she's a 10 to me. And I was like, I'm pretty sure my wife doesn't see me as a 10 because I'm not a 10 in terms of, looks department. So, and I'm okay with that, it's okay with me. And so I was like, yeah, I wonder what, or I don't know what I said, but I think I said something like, I don't think my wife would have seen me. But anyway, so Podwife actually inserts here. I don't think she commented on YouTube. I think she just inserted it into this doc. She says, you're a 10 to me. You're the whole package. Smiley face. Well, thanks, Podwife. That's nice of you. Cole interview number 5. Stormy says, I totally agree. The vibe I get from Zenib is that she fancies herself to be some kind of heroine. So I was wondering if, or Cole was, but eventually in the reaction videos I started, I don't know which ones I've posted exactly, but I started to wonder, and there's no way to know this, that it's possible that Zenib, and I'll just briefly summarize it, you can listen to my long discussions later, but that Zenib might be distorting what's happening, who knows, and is feeling as though she is part of the movement against men being misogynistic and body shaming and all that kind of stuff. You know, she feels like she's a heroine she's a hero in the movement pushing against the toxicity of society, and that Cole is an example of that, and Zenib is a hero. Given her distortions of the way she sees Cole potentially, and given, you know, I could see a world in which Zenib feels shaky regarding her justification in terms of her perspective, and thus is invoking a cultural movement to bolster her claim on the way that she feels. You know, I talk about it to much greater degree in another episode that I don't think has been posted yet. But anyway, so Stormy says, I totally agree. The vibe I get from Zenib is that she fancies herself to be some kind of heroine standing up to abuse and injustice, just like the Me Too victims. You know, it's hard to know. I don't like making that accusation to Zenib without talking with her. Yeah. Jesse says, the only ones who win from the cuties scene are the cuties brand. Yeah, it is funny because I've never even heard. I don't know. Maybe they don't sell them in Seattle, or I don't note the brands of my tangerines. Plus, I don't like Is it tangerines? I like Satsumas, Japanese. I don't know if you got them around in your part of town, but makes my mouth water. But Satsumas, Japanese small oranges, are the best. They taste so good, and they also will. You can peel them very easily. Some tangerines, you're really working at it, you know. And I like to get into my oranges fast. Yeah, just another reason why Japanese fruit is just some of the best. You know, Fuji apples, that kind of stuff. It's just the grapes they have in Japan. Anyway, Bartice interview number 1. Macy says, Latchkey, right? So, okay, it's Nick Lachey. Dr. Honda, you are total Gen X. I know I've heard that before, but I have no idea who those people are. Apparently, they're really famous. Nick and Vanessa Lachey. Okay. I always just feel, anyway, but yeah, I am very Gen X. I have no idea who those people are. I really don't. And it wouldn't be that hard to remember, but so that's kind of on me. But yeah, Little Brownie says, I think Bartice has simply learned what the public wants to hear to rehabilitate his image. Also, that host's composition notebook laptop cover is on fire. Yeah, I noticed that too. I didn't comment on it. So with Nick Vial, who I thought was Nick Vial for a while, because that's how it's spelled, that for him, his co-host has a laptop with that composition notebook thing on the side. And I remember thinking, I thought, oh, that's really cool. But Lil Brownie says that they think Bartice is just putting on, he hasn't really learned from his mistakes, and that he's just putting on a persona because he thinks that's what people want to hear. Yeah, it's hard to tell with him. And often the cast members on these shows, I don't know, they just very rarely exhibit any kind of personal responsibility or growth. It's actually kind of disheartening when I think about it, that because I would just think for myself, I would hope that if I went on one of these shows and had a lot of criticism and a lot of experiences, and particularly, you know, if I went through a bad relationship, that, you know, I'd have a lot of thoughts about the internet and about my partner, but I would like to think that I would have some thoughts about how I contributed to it, and I would hope that I would lead with that stuff. And I would hope that other people would too. You know, it's not hard to do, and it's not hard to find things that are odd or problematic about your personality when you go on a reality TV show, particularly when everyone's yelling at you. Now, I will say that the majority of people yelling at the cast members, they're doing it in such an exaggeratory, hostile, unfair way that sometimes I wonder if the cast doesn't benefit from the feedback because it's so absurd. So if the feedback was more rational overall, then maybe that would help. I don't know. So it's hard to know if Bartise learned anything. But Andra says, I don't agree with people who vilify Bartise. I think he's a nice person, but that he doesn't understand how his actions impact others. He just seems immature to me. I hope he learns. Yeah. Bartise interview number 2. Zahn says, I would like to add that culture also plays a role in all of this. Ask any European who dated an American, and they will say that romance is ingrained deep in American culture, romance. By that I mean the fairy tale, swept off my feet, fate bringing people together, the one, soulmates, etc. Yeah, so what Zahn is saying, and it's good I always like hearing stuff like this because as an American myself, I'm completely indoctrinated into it, so it's harder for me to step outside of my culture and look at it. But other people from other cultures can. And so what Zahn is saying is that in America, we have this idea in mainstream culture that romance is this fairy tale, swept off your feet and fate bringing us together and the one and soulmates, whereas other people don't really see it that way. They have a more pragmatic, down-to-earth point of view about romantic relationships. And I would say that each notion is a cultural notion. I mean, any idea of romantic relationship is culturally and socially constructed to a large extent. So it's not that Europeans are right and Americans are wrong or vice versa. It's that each is different. And so the key is that we're able, as people embedded in whatever culture we're in, we're able to differentiate at times and look at it and evaluate whether or not that's a helpful perspective to have. Because, I could see it going either way, right? The American culture could be bad in a lot of ways because it puts on too much expectations and distorts what a good relationship will look like. And will also cause people to get divorced really early because they've lost the fairy tale after a couple years. But that's normal to happen. And so because they're chasing some irrational expectation of relationships, they're always ruining everything, certainly. But I could see on the other hand that when you have all this high expectation, like for me, I'm embedded in American culture in this way and highly regard my romantic relationship with my wife and depend on it. Compared to other cultures, I probably have a lot more eggs in that basket and derive a lot more meaning in that way in my life. But if I have the means or the ability or the relationship to have it go well, then that's not a bad thing for me. You know what I mean? So I think it just depends on the situation. Another bad side effect from this notion is that a lot of Americans will have no relationships outside of their romantic relationship, which is not healthy, usually. Nancy interview, Catherine says, I really felt for Nancy in that moment when she was blank, as you say. I've definitely had that experience, almost certainly linked to specific traumas in my life. I'm not even actively processing what's happening when I'm blank, and only after a tough conversation do I go, wait, what the F? Yeah. SM says, Dr. Honda and Nancy are matching. Yeah, I noticed that too. I didn't say anything though. Big Ed 60, we're getting into Love is Blind. Okowala says, Dr. Honda's focus on the Seahawks hat was hilarious. Yeah, it was the episode where Ed is naked, or I guess they're both naked. And I'm like, does he have a Seahawks hat on? Because I thought, because he's from San Diego, and there's the so the Chargers are in LA, but I always think of the Chargers as being from San Diego. Do San Diego people, do you think of the Chargers always being from San Diego? Dan Fouts, that whole thing is a great era, San Diego Chargers. So I guess currently, if you're in San Diego, you don't have a team, so you could be a fan for any team, but. Also, another thing is back, I always, with football, back in the day, the Seahawks used to be in the same conference, the same division as the Chargers. It was the Chargers, the Oakland Raiders, the Chiefs, if I remember right, and Seattle Seahawks. And so they were rivals. And so it's just surprising to me to see someone in San Diego with a Seahawks hat. Heather says, I used to do abusive behavior in relationships because I didn't know what it was. When I learned how some of the specific things that I was doing were abusive, then I was able to stop doing them. Life is so much better when you're not hurting people all the time. Well, good job, Heather. I'm glad you have the maturity, the differentiation, the compassion, the wonderfulness to recognize when you were being abusive and you take an action to not do that anymore. That's great. Big Ed 61, good old lean donut says, just to clarify, Big Ed cheated on his wife while she was pregnant with Tiffany. Yeah, I knew that at one point. I keep forgetting. I need to keep like a profile on some of these people. I just feel like by now it's like there's so much information that I also kind of wish there was a Wikipedia, like a wiki style website that had all the 90 Day Fiance stuff. Just because there's a lot of details that you kind of want to know just as a fan of the show. And because sometimes when I'm like, what season was this person on? So there's an actual Wikipedia page, but it's not very useful. Anyway, you would think with all the with the huge fan base of 90 Day Fiance that someone would step forward and make like there's a wiki for Star Wars. It was a Wikipedia. And so you just think there would be one for 90 Day Fiance. It'd be nice to have. Mojo says, I only dated one person in high school for a few months. I feel like most people don't get a lot of dating experience prior to adulthood, but I could be wrong. We all know Dr. Kirk Honda was a football star and rock musician, so he must have been getting it in. Is that a phrase, getting it in? And does that mean what I think it means? Anyway, so sometimes I assume that people have had romantic relationships before adulthood, and that and by different discourse, and of course that's not always true. And but what I'll say to that is, well, one, I'll just try to incorporate that into my commentary. But another thing that I think, and it's getting worse, is that it's becoming more and more normalized for people not to have romantic relationships when they're younger. And of course, case by case basis, it's not everyone has to do that, but generally speaking, I think it helps in maturity and development, getting to know yourself. There are risks, of course, but I think that everyone, in my conceptualization of this topic, everyone has to go through a certain amount of experiences romantically and sexually before they know who they are and know what they want. And so along those lines, if you wait until you're 22 to start dating people, fine, but you have a lot to learn before you actually know enough to make sound choices in relationships, typically. So, I just wish that people would consider that. And, religions will get in the way because they won't let people do that kind of stuff. And I don't know the research on it. Of course, I'm just coming from my own cultural experience, but I don't know. I worry about the future of our society in that people are becoming more and more isolated, including young people. And I just worry about things. Life is messy, and you can't learn unless you experience the messiness. You have to get into it. You got to get messy. You got to experience it. You got to go through the bad things and the good things before you know who you are, know what you want, all that stuff. I just think that the more isolated we become, the worse off we are in a variety of ways. Kate says, I would love it if your family of origin class could be made into one of those masterclass sessions for people to begin diving into this for their own discovery. Or are there any good books that you recommend? Right, so I was talking about family of origin therapy, and yeah, that'd be interesting because the main class the most frequent class I probably taught, well, no, because case consultation. One of the most frequent classes I taught for 25 years was family of origin. It was the first class I taught. And it's a wonderful class that I think everyone could benefit from. It's essentially self-analysis and learning about concepts. But a master class, yeah, that'd be interesting to do for sure. But are there any good books? Now I have episodes on family of origin therapy that you can listen to, but the books I would recommend are Intimacy Paradox by Donald Williamson, Family of Origin Therapy by James Framo, and Monica McGoldrick has a book called You Can't Go Home Again. Maybe that's the best one, You Can't Go Home Again by Monica McGoldrick. And you could probably get a used one for like $1 on Amazon, I'm guessing. Those are books off the top of my head. Angela Michael 56. Leah says, the part at the end about abusive and narcissistic people giving degrading nicknames was really interesting to me. I have a sister-in-law who is a long-time alcoholic and whose behavior seems consistent with borderline. She used to call me Little Missy, and she referred to my husband and me as the children. I always wondered if I was wrong and this was actually meant to be endearing, even though it never felt endearing. Your analysis of Angela helped me to find clarity about this issue. Yeah. Natalie, 19. This is the one which I compared the beginning with Mike to the ending now with Josh. Hannah says, I am from Ukraine, and I am getting really aggravated by the mom even more than Natalie. So what Hannah is saying is, being Ukrainian, looking at Natalie's mom, Hannah is very aggravated with the mom. Because I was wondering, when I was rewatching that scene, I was like, the mom seems pretty badgering of Natalie about the kid, and also, and I didn't notice that the first time through, I think, and I also wondered if Natalie had amplified her issues because the mom was there pressuring her to have kids. Like the whole reason why Natalie was being overly overly distorting of Mike's messaging around wanting kids. Because Mike was like, yeah, I want kids, but I don't want to get pregnant today, if that's what you're talking about. And so Hannah was like, I am from Ukraine, and I am getting really aggravated by the mom even more than Natalie. The constant pounding of I need grandbabies over the head, oblivious to how sore the subject is for her daughter, and her fake sweet tone comes off as manipulative as hell to me, saying, I am just a simple grandma who wants grandkids. Yeah, that's really interesting to me because I don't understand the language, and so I can't. It's much harder for me to interpret the nonverbals. But for Hannah, they're like, it comes across as fake nice tone, which would explain a lot about Natalie, I think, because you just imagine that would generalize to a lot of interactions between the mom and Natalie when she was growing up, which could obviously do a number on you. Good old Abominable Snowman says, the hardest thing about being on the borderline spectrum is knowing that once you show the full breadth of your insecurities, even in a more differentiated way, that it's going to be scary for people. It's hard to take on someone with that level of emotional pain. Once you're aware you have borderline, you know that people who are more emotionally healthy and have their lives together don't want to deal with that. Even if they care, it's going to be from a distance. It's really depressing. End of comment. Yeah, well, so what I'll say about Abominable Snowman is that certainly that is the case, and it depends on the person. So I would say there's a number of different configurations. So there's like 4 quadrants in my head. I don't know why I'm visualizing it this way, but so the person with borderline, there's a way of telling your partner that you have borderline in a hostile, accusatory way and a non-hostile, non-accusatory way. Okay, so that's one of the dimensions, one of the things. The other dimension on the x-axis is that as a receiver of that information, you have people who are who understand it enough or value vulnerability enough such that when you tell them in a non-accusatory, non-hostile way about your borderline, they actually not only will receive it well, but they actually will be thankful that you're able to talk about such things because they want to talk about their vulnerabilities too. They don't have borderline, but they want to talk about their own. And they're like, yeah, let's talk about our vulnerabilities. You have yours, I have mine. But there's another sort of person when they're told this information that because of their upbringing, their relational traumas, their lack of awareness, they'll run even though you are being non-accusatory and non-hostile. So the best configuration is for the borderline individual to have enough differentiation to approach their partners and say, I have this problem. I have relational traumas. It causes these distortions. It causes these exaggeratory emotional reactivity. And I have impulses to get upset. but really it's just because I'm terrified I'm going to lose someone, and I get hurt really easily. I'm working on it in therapy, and I would love it if you could help me with that. And this is something that we're both just going to have to deal with, but understand that at the end of the day, I don't blame you for any of my issues. So, I frame that in a very non-accusatory, non-hostile way that takes responsibility for one's feelings. So the best scenario is you say that, and which isn't always the case, but the best case scenario is the person, your partner, says, wow, thank you for saying that, because I've been detecting some things. Also, I have my vulnerabilities and I have my issues. So for you to bring it up like this and to model it like that, it's like, great, because I want to talk about my things. So that's kind of the best case scenario. You're saying that no one will want to deal with that. And I'm saying that some people won't, but some people will. Now, if you're accusatory and hostile, even if the person is open to hearing the information, they probably will have an impulse to run. Not always, but often will. And then you're saying even if they care, it's going to be from a distance. That's not true. If you find someone that values vulnerability and sees it for what it is, and you're being non-accusatory, non-hostile, you're not being unfair, then they will not care from a distance. They will care close to you. They might even pull them closer to you. I mean, that's how I am with my clients when they come forward and we conceptualize them with borderline. Some of the deepest relationships that I've leaned into as a therapist with clients were with people that had personality disorders, including borderline. Because I, as a therapist, recognize how important it is and how there's just so much need there, and that can really amplify the closeness that I feel with a client. And I go through a lot with those clients. There's a lot of ups and downs. So I don't care about them from a distance. If anything, I get closer. So it just depends on the person. All right. Well, that does it for that episode. Thanks for everyone for commenting on all the various things. Like I said, I do see a lot of them. The nice ones are fulfilling to me and validate my existence. And, if you have, so you can criticize me. It's all a matter of tone. It's all a matter of, is it mean? Then that hurts. But if it's not mean, if it's just like, hey, Kirk, I think you're wrong about this. I like you as a person, but I think you're wrong about this and this and that. Then I like that, actually, because I want to learn and I want to grow and I want to develop further. I want to be more broad in my understanding. And I would say 95% of the things that I know or feel or the paradigm that I have is because someone told me I was wrong and told me nicely how I could broaden my perspective. So, but anyway, yeah. And happy holidays, and take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.